crossing, all, the pillar of fire, pillar of cloud, the man. I mean, all these things that go into it, God says, I'm the Lord your God that did all these things for you. Okay, and what that's supposed to do is it's supposed to say to the Israelites, I'm a good God. I'm for you. I want you to follow me. I know what's best. If I'm smart enough and powerful enough to deliver you, I'm smart enough and powerful enough to get you into the promised land and to make you happy and prosperous. But here's how that has to happen. These are the rules by which you achieve that contentment, that happiness, that peace, that, all the fulfillment that we talk about. And again, these things being an allegory, according to the New Testament, these things are an allegory for us. They're a picture of something, and this really is the picture of the sinner in the bonds of sin gets delivered. And out in the wilderness is the time of learning. It's kind of the process of God getting the world out of you while he gets his word into you, so that when you have matured, you are ready to live the victorious, faith-filled Christian life in the promised land, if you will. Promised land, in music and that, we often, it's often portrayed as heaven. But when the Israelites got to the promised land, they had to fight battles, and they still face problems and things that we'll never see in heaven. So that's really not the picture. The picture is really all about having victory and being victorious, and being victorious with God in particular. And that's what God wants for the Christian life. And so that time between your deliverance, your salvation, and that time of maturity is the wilderness time, in which God is instructing you and teaching you, and he's testing you. He says many times in this wilderness wandering period that, I'm giving you this to prove you, like with the manna. I'm giving you the rules for the manna just to see if you'll follow them. I don't have to make all the leftovers breed worms if you don't throw them out, and I don't have to do this and I don't have to do that. I could just rain manna down. I could make it very simple and all of that. But no, I'm gonna throw in a few things just to see if you'll do them or not, just to see where I rank in your priorities, whether my word is important to you or not. And I think there's some things in the New Testament that God gives us that it's really just about God testing us to see if we'll actually do it or not. How important is God's word? You say, well, it's not really a big deal. It's a big deal because God said to do it. That makes it a big deal. And God's saying, hey, if I said to do it, do it. And if you do, I will bless you for it. But if you don't do that, you're just proving to me my word's not important. And I'm not going to give you more revelation, and I'm not going to give you more blessing if you won't adhere to the ones that I am giving you. And so I think a lot of Christians, because of their refusal to follow Scripture as they grow and learn, they kind of reach points where it's like, well, I don't really want to do that. Well, if I surrender this area of my life, then I'm not going to be happy, and I won't be able to do it my way anymore, and I'm really happy doing it my way. And they stop growing, and they get stuck in the wilderness, and they never figure out what the promised land in the Christian life is really all about. And it's a shame that they do that they quit before they get there, but I've seen many, many Christians just quit out in the wilderness, and that they're content to wander around out in the wilderness, and they're just refusing to learn and grow. And that is a shame, because there's so much more to the Christian life than what the wilderness has to offer. It's a testing ground, it's a learning ground, and it's a preparation ground for that faith-filled Christian life. So we looked at the first 4 commandments last week in particular that really deal with our relationship to God. Thou shalt not have any other gods before me. And really that's God's way of saying, you get to have me, don't put anything before me. You already have the best in me. Why would you put something inferior between you and me? Have me, let me be your God, let me be your only God, worship me, follow me. Don't make, the second commandment, don't make unto thee any graven image. Don't create your own God. Don't try to force me into your mold. Don't try to get me to conform to your will. You let me do the shaping, and you let me do the conforming, and I'm going to conform you to my will. You'll be happier that way. It's funny that there are a lot of, I hear a lot of doctrine sometimes, false doctrine come out of people's mouths. that is specifically designed to limit God and put God in their box. Well, God would never do this. He would never do this way. And they only say that because they can't conceive of God doing something differently than the only way they can conceive God doing it, not because the Scripture says God would never do that. And we tend to put God in a box. We say things like, well, God doesn't heal anymore. Oh, he doesn't? What's your evidence for that? Now, I don't go around smacking people on the forehead and God heals them. I don't go around spitting in the mud, spitting in the dirt, making mud, rubbing it on people's eyes and saying, go wash in the fountain downtown and you'll be able to see. I don't do things like that. We don't believe in faith healing. We don't believe in faith healers, and we don't believe in the gift of healing. But do you really think God doesn't heal people anymore? Oh, that spot on the first x-ray, they just need to clean the lens better, Well, it may be. It may be that they messed something up on the image and they saw the lump or they saw the black spot in there and they said, boy, we got to do more tests. And they go to do more tests. They find out there's no spot. And perhaps there was some kind of anomaly with the technology that put a lump on the screen or a black spot on the screen that really didn't belong there. That could happen. It also is perfectly within the realm of possibility that there was a spot there and they found it on the x-ray, and between the x-ray and the biopsy or the almost said autopsy, the biopsy, it's too late when you get to the autopsy, the biopsy or the surgery or whatever, that it's perfectly plausible that through prayer God removes the tumor. Why do we bother praying for people if we don't believe God would ever do anything about our prayer? Now, we put that in the context of, Lord, whatever your will is, if it's your will to heal, if it's not your will to heal. We don't impose upon God our will and say, this is what you need to do, God, do it. That is not correct. But at the same time, why would we ever pray for God to heal somebody if we don't think that he does? Even if we believe he can, well, I know God can heal, but he just doesn't do that anymore. Well, I don't know where you get that from. Just because we don't believe in having a line here after church and I heal all your maladies, you come up and, I knock you down and you start rolling around and foaming at the mouth on the floor, doesn't mean we don't believe in healing. We got to be careful that we worship. We have God, we have a relationship with God, we don't let anything get between it, and then two, we don't do anything to limit our God or create another God or an image of God or something that distracts us from the real. Really, 1 and 2 are just about don't have counterfeit in place of the real thing. The third commandment, not taking the name of the Lord your God in vain, don't do that. And that really has to do with dragging God into your sin. It has to do with, it can have to do with, you lying but invoking the name of God to bolster your lie, or conning somebody and you bring God into it to bolster that. You take the name of the Lord and you bring that down into a dragging that down into your sinful behavior. Has more to do with that than some of the ways that we often think. But we ought to have a high reverence for the name of God. We ought to be careful how we use those names, the names and titles for God. We ought to be very careful how we do that, because the Lord will not hold him guiltless that taketh his name in vain. And so that's a very serious statement there. And so we just need to be careful that we remain reverent when it comes to the name of the Lord, the names and titles of God, and that we keep those holy, and we don't bring those down, use them in crass, vulgar, profane, deceptive kind of ways. Fourth commandment, again, still dealing with our relationship with God, remembering the Sabbath day to keep it holy. There's 6 days of work. The seventh day is a day of rest. I believe it's still God's purpose for us to have a day of rest, a day of worship, a day to recharge, a day to recenter our focus on the Lord. As New Testament believers, we do that on Sunday, the first day of the week, because that's the day Christ rose from the dead. It's referred to in Scripture as the Lord's Day, and so we do our primary corporate worship on Sundays. The early church worshiped every day. They gathered every day for corporate worship and preaching and all of that kind of stuff. We do our primary worshiping on Sunday, and I still think it's a good idea to, have a day where you don't schedule it up with stuff. Spend time with your family, spend time with the Lord, go to church, of course, do those things, but there should be a day, and I believe the Lord's Day is kind of what we use as a Sabbath day, a day to just, this day is to the Lord. It's about recentering, refocusing, resting, and all of those things. And if we're not careful, we're running from church to the soccer game, to the volleyball match, to the baseball game, and spending all day Sunday, and Sunday's just like every other day of the week. And that's the danger, that we just treat Sunday like every other day of the week, and we treat church like any other activity, except we probably wouldn't have our kids miss dance class, but we would have them miss Sunday school. So we're really not treating church like other things. We're treating church less than other things. So that's where the prohibition applies to us. That's where the commandment really applies to us is, set a day for the Lord and rest and worship and that. The fifth commandment that we started to, we got into last week, verse 12, honor thy father and thy mother, that thy days may be long upon the land which the Lord thy God giveth thee. That is the first commandment with promise, according to Ephesians. It's the first commandment, has a promise directly attached to it. Talked about the importance of the home. The home is the foundation of society. God is a very orderly God. God didn't throw these commandments out just randomly or haphazardly. They're grouped by our relationship with Him, then our relationship with other people, and they're grouped in a very logical order. These last 6 are very logical. What's our first relationship as people? It's with our parents. We are going to have a lot of moral formation, educational formation, just behavioral formation, just by observing, interacting with our parents. And so the onus is on children, and it's on offspring in general, whether they're younger or older. Children, obey your parents in the Lord. Okay, the day I got married was the day that command absolutely had no impact on me. I'm no longer obligated to obey my dad. I'm my own head of my own house. I don't have to obey. I'm not a child. I'm his child. I'm his offspring, but I'm not a child. I'm not young, underage, if you will. And so, but that command to honor my father and mother is still upon me. That never changes. To the day my dad dies, he deserves to be respected. He deserves to have that honor given to him. And it's just having the attitude, which is contrary, when you hit 12, 13 years old, the attitude is my parents are stupid, they don't know anything. There's just kind of a natural, self-inflated superiority where you think you know everything, you think you're invincible, you think nobody else knows what they're talking about. You're not very open to a lot of instruction on how to do things, especially from your parents. And so, your friends all day long who don't know any more than you do, you'll listen to them all day long, but your parents who've been there and been around the block a couple times, you won't listen to them. They don't know what they're talking about. That was your generation. You don't know. You don't understand what it's like nowadays. And it's natural to get that, but to honor your parents, to honor your father and mother, really is, especially as teenagers, to say, Mom and Dad have been there. I may not agree with them, but I'm going to hear them out. I'm going to listen to them and consider what they have to say. I'm going to show them the respect and the honor to let them tell me what they think. And Parents always have the right to sit their kids down, whether they're children or adults, to sit them down and say, I'm not happy with the direction you're going. I think you're making some bad choices here. And our responsibility should be to hear them out, listen to them. We don't have to agree with them, but to hear them out, take what they have to say, consider it, pray about it, think about it, be open to the people who know us best. Maybe they have insight that we don't have. And just the well-functioning home makes for a good society, and we talked about the problem with that last week. So we're going to finish the last 5 commandments here. Verse 13, here's a real hard one: thou shalt not kill. Boy, that's a hard one. Can't memorize things. We'll memorize commandment 6. The word kill here literally means to murder, okay? It is not the generic word for just kill. Don't kill animals, it's not that word. It literally is the word for murder, and he's talking about murder here. This commandment does not have anything to do with capital punishment. I hear people who are against capital punishment, and they'll use this verse. God is not in favor of capital punishment. Thou shalt not kill. The problem with that is, if you keep reading your Bible and you don't act like a third grader when you read something, as soon as you find something that supports your argument, you stop. But you keep reading, you find that the penalty, verse 12 of chapter 21, he that smiteth a man so that he die shall surely be put to death. So can I use thou shalt not kill as an argument against the death penalty? No, because the same God who said you don't have the right to kill said society has the right to kill people who kill people. We have the right to put murderers to death. And there were certain crimes under the law that God said, kidnapping was a capital offense, murder was a capital offense, adultery under Jewish law was a capital offense. There were a lot of moral and civil laws that the penalty was death. There was drag them from the horns of the altar and kill them outside the camp. That was God's perspective on that. This commandment is about the deliberate taking of human life. Again, not talking about capital punishment. Capital punishment is a societal function. It's a societal method of removing evil from it. Okay, how do we get rid of the evil in our society? Well, we put evil people to death. That's what we do. And if you're so evil that you would murder somebody, take an innocent life, well, then you forfeit your own. And what that does is it puts a very high price on life, puts a high value on human life. It's why we reject euthanasia, we reject abortion, because from conception to natural death, we believe that life has value. God has placed value on life. And the only price that is fitting for taking somebody else's life is society taking your life. Because the value of something is determined by the price that's paid for it. Not the price that's asked for it, but the price that's actually paid for it. And so what is the value of a human life? Why do we have such a low value on human life? Why are a lot of Western nations enacting medically assisted suicide, where people, if they just don't feel good, they just don't feel like going on, they can go to the doctor and the doctor can line them up to kill themselves? Why is there this, it's funny every time some pro-life legislation, like out in Arizona, the Supreme Court in Arizona just ruled that a law from before Arizona was even a state was constitutional, and that law barred all abortions. And the left freaked out. I mean, how dare women not have the right to murder their children? Why are we so callous about these things? Why is it we just accept that people are just going to go into a school and shoot 15 kindergartners? People are gonna get road rage and kill each other on the freeways. Why do we accept that? Why does that not truly offend our sensibilities as a society? And it's because we have a low value of life. And we've been devaluing life as the penalties for taking life have diminished. It used to be capital punishment was a fairly common thing. If you were a murderer, the death penalty, the gas chamber, the electric chair, were just, really up until about 20 years ago, it was very common for the federal government and most states, almost all states still actively had the death penalty in the 1990s. And now very few states have the death penalty, and the ones that do aren't really exercising it. Instead, we'll sentence you to 25 years in prison, 20 years in prison, 15 years in prison. And we make a lot of excuses for the murderer. Well, they were really agitated, or their mom beat them when they were a kid, or whatever. And we make all these excuses, and all that does is continue to devalue life. And that's a very dangerous place to be in society, and we are literally in a place in our society here in America where life is losing value and losing meaning to the point where, we have crime rates in some of our cities that match third world countries where, rival gangs just go and slaughter each other all day long. I would not want to walk around the streets of South Chicago without, full armor. Drive me around in a M1 Abrams tank. There's so much gunfire and people being shot over there. You never hear about that on the news, but just about every weekend in Chicago, there'll be 30 or 40 people get shot, 6, 8, 10 people get murdered on an average weekend in Chicago, and you think, we don't talk about that, But, if a Republican spits on the sidewalk, then that's got to be national news. So if we had a more just society, if we had a more Christian society, those who commit murder would be put to death without any exceptions. If you're found guilty of intentionally murdering somebody, I think there's some reforms internally in our justice system that need to happen as well, but you're put to death. And it's not going to be 10 years from now or 18 years from now when we put you to death. It's going to be 30 days from now. We're going to give you 30 days to come up with some reason why this is wrong, and if you can't come up with one, we put you to death. Are we going to accidentally execute people who are truly innocent and find that out later? That's going to happen once in a while. But the number of innocent people who don't get murdered because they see what happens to people who murder other people, the number of innocent people that don't get murdered will far outnumber the number of innocent people who get executed. We will be a net gain of life saved. That's God's perspective on it. And it's not cruel, and it's not mean, and it's not harsh, and it's not any of those things. What it says is, I have the right to live. I have the right to walk down the sidewalk without worrying about getting shot or run over or stabbed or whatever. I have the right to that. God says I have the right to live. And nobody has the right to take my life away from me. And to place such a high value is to say anybody who does intentionally take my life, they get the gas chamber, they get the death penalty. I think we should just go back to firing squads personally. I would volunteer for that in a heartbeat. It would be very cathartic for me. Getting to put evil out of our society, it would make me feel much better when I preach. I don't know. He said, Pastor, that's cruel. No, it's justice. It's God's justice. Obviously I wouldn't really revel in that or be happy about that, but I would be happy if we executed people who commit crimes worthy of death. And if we did it consistently all the time, crime would go down because we'd start running out of evil people, hopefully. If people don't reform, then we just purge them from our society, and that's kind of what that did. So you think about the progression here. My first relationships revolve around the home. Honor your father and mother. So respect in the home, respect for my parents and the authorities that are there. And then as I grow into adulthood and I become more independent, now my next commandment is everybody else has a right to live on this planet too. You don't get to decide that. So it's a very broad, you got to value life. Then it goes on to say in verse 14, thou shalt not commit adultery. Okay? So I grow up, I become a teenager, become an adult, a young adult. I have a responsibility to be careful because people have a right to live, drive carefully, be careful, in how I conduct myself. If I'm going to engage in, if I'm going to go out and do target practice, make sure I don't, put the target in front of a school or something. I have the responsibility to make sure that I don't infringe upon anyone else's right to live. And then the next commandment goes into the next important relationship that adults generally have, and that is they get married. And so thou shalt not commit adultery becomes the next one. It's a command that puts a high value on the institution of marriage. Marriage was ordained by God. Marriage is not a state institution. I personally don't believe in state-issued marriage licenses, but if you want the benefits in the tax code that go with being married and the other legal benefits, then you should go get one. Do I believe people who don't have a marriage license are not married? No, because the state doesn't decide who can get married and who can't get married. That's not the state's job. It never was the state's role. God instituted marriage before there was a state. And marriage licenses only became popular in the United States, really, to stop blacks and whites from marrying in the antebellum South and other places. But the idea that you are not allowed to marry unless the state gives you a license to do that is not biblical. And the fact that the state hands out marriage licenses to homosexual couples and will, I'm sure, start handing out marriage licenses to 3 people or 5 people or however many people want to form a ridiculous perversion of marriage, I'm sure they'll do that. Well, does that mean God blesses those marriages too? No, because state doesn't get to decide these things. God decided what it is. It's one man, one woman for one lifetime in Genesis chapter 2. He established that. He defined it, put some bounds on it. And he says if you're going to get married, then you need to be faithful. The idea of protecting marriage, valuing marriage, being abstinent before marriage, being monogamous in marriage, these are things that God is very serious about, so much so that being sexually promiscuous before marriage, committing adultery, these could be capital offenses, and many times would be capital offenses depending on the situation. What's the big deal? We're here in 2024, and we're post the sexual revolution, we're post the mainstreaming of homosexuality, we're post the mainstreaming now of transgenderism. You could argue maybe we're not quite all the way there yet, but we're so far down this road, and more pedophilia is being tolerated and not looked down upon. Minor attracted people, they want to call them now. They're just attracted to they're just pedophiles. That's what they are. Why are these things so important? Because we are $34 trillion in debt, I believe, as a nation, and you could probably chalk the vast majority of that, probably 30 million of that, just down to the fact that we as a nation have mainstreamed sex before marriage and sex outside of marriage, and we don't really care as a society about those issues anymore. And so now almost half of the children born in the United States are born out of wedlock. They're born without 2 parents in the home. In the black community, it's 70% of children are born without a father in the home. Whites, I think, are right around 40%, and you factor in Hispanics and Asians, that number goes down, and it averages out to like 42, 43% of children. Well, what are the ramifications of that? The ramifications of that is children don't have a stable home. There's not the proper structure in there, so we've spent, I think it's around $25 trillion on welfare programs to make up for the fact that dad is not doing his job. He's not going to work, providing for his family. Instead, you have this mom with a baby, and so we give them WIC and food stamps and rent assistance and all of this other kind of stuff. That's not the government's responsibility to take care of, by the way. It's really the church's job to take care of that. But if we didn't bend over backwards to just hand money to people who make bad decisions, people would make better decisions. But since we subsidize bad living and bad choices and sinful activity, we have to subsidize more of it. And 25 trillion of that 34 trillion that we're in debt is really due to welfare programs, which would not be necessary if you had stable two-parent homes bringing children into the world. Am I not wrong about this? And it's all simply a matter, and divorce plays into that. How much of divorce is related to infidelity? A great number of that. Again, is divorce a good thing? No. It's not good for the kids. It's not good for I've never yet met an adult who said, boy, I want to get married again just so I can get divorced in a couple years. It was so much fun the first time, I just got to try it again. I don't know any adult who's been through a divorce that says, that was the best experience of my life. I can't wait to do it again. Every adult that I've ever talked to that's been through a divorce said, I hope I never have to do that again. That was awful, and it was terrible. And if they small kids involved, it hurts them. And then you deal with the educational costs. How much money do we spend on education to teach kids things that mom and dad just used to teach the kids to do? I love watching, hearing from our parents and seeing on Facebook, parents at our church is just kind of ingrained in us because we're responsible. By the time our kids are going to kindergarten, they already know how to read, and they know their colors and shapes and their address and things like that, because the mom and dad are there and take an interest and invest in and do that, because you don't have a single mom who's got to go to work and work 2 jobs to support all these kids that she doesn't have a husband at home and a father in the home to take care of. And so she's out doing it. And who teaches the kids? Well, nobody. And so we have to have Head Start and preschool and all these other kinds of things to do the things mom and dad used to do. And how much money do we spend on that? How much money do we spend more on education than almost any Western country, and yet we're like 52nd in the world in education. Why is that? Because we don't have stable homes. These kids come to school. They haven't sometimes been fed breakfast. Nobody spanks their butt when they're being bad. They act like total maniacs when they get to the classroom, because there's not a stable home. And so how much money do we spend on education that is just totally not necessary if mom and dad did their job? It's amazing. I grew up in a Christian school. My kids went to Christian school, and you can pay, a couple $1,000s a year per student. Let's say you send 2 kids to a Christian school and you spend $5,000 a year total on their education. You know what the government has to spend in the public schools to educate those same 2 children? It's like $14,000 per. Well, how can the private school do it? Well, parents who are sending their kids to private school are probably got it together, and they don't need the private school to teach them how to read and write. They already did that. And the private school parents will spend time doing the homework with the kid. I get so sick of hearing, well, the inner city schools don't get enough education money, and all the wealthier neighborhoods, their kids just do better, and that just shows that there's racism and discrimination. No, it shows that there's one set of parents doing their job, and there's one set of parents who just aren't. We don't want to admit that and say that out loud. But I bet if you go into those wealthier school districts where the students do much better on all the tests, I bet you'll find that the overwhelming majority of those families are stable 2-parent homes. You go to the inner city, do you expect to find a lot of stable 2-parent homes? No. And so God says, I created marriage, 2 people come together committed, and then they begin to have children. The commitment comes first, the children come second. If the children come before the commitment, you know what happens? We have all this extra money we have to spend. And that doesn't even count all the money that we spend on the criminal justice system, the cost of crime that is overwhelmingly committed. 80% of violent crimes committed by those who didn't have a father in the home growing up. It really is that simple. I've been to and preached in prisons here in Ohio. I've been to 2 of the largest prisons in Ohio. I've talked to hundreds of inmates that are in prison. And to a man, mom raised them. And bless their hearts. Single moms, widows that have to raise their kids, bless them. It's not an easy job. As a church, we ought to look to the fatherless homes, the widows, and we ought to do everything we can for them, because it is very important that there is a father in the home teaching their children, enforcing right and wrong, and making sure that their kids are provided for. Because if they don't, they're more likely to be on drugs, they're more likely to be on booze, they're more likely to be in prison, they're more likely to ruin their life, and they're more likely to cost society a lot of money. We give them free health care, pay for prison, pay for court system, pay for cops, pay for rehabs, pay for all these things that society is paying for out of its pocket. And the overwhelming majority of that can be traced to the breakdown of the home. Again, you go back to the first commandment in this group, number 5, and then you come over to number 7, and it's reinforcing, if you get married, you better be serious. And if you're not a serious enough person to make the commitment to get married, you're not serious enough to have children. Children are harder than marriage. Marriage is hard, children are harder. If you can't do the easier step, don't do the harder step. And so, again, it would take 2 or 3 generations to clean up the mess we made. Even if there was a revival in our nation tomorrow that swept our land and people returned to God, it would take a couple generations to clean up the mess we've made. The problems in our society are not going to go away overnight. There's going to be a whole generation of people that have to be taught how things are supposed to work, taught the value of marriage, taught abstinence, taught how to raise kids. I was in a restaurant the other day, and there's a kid in there, and he was just squalling and fussing, and the 3 adults with this kid just looking at him like they, while everyone else in the restaurant's listening to this kid scream. And he was not screaming because he needed anything. He was screaming because that's apparently the only way he gets any attention. I thought about spanking the parents and the kid. Parents, whoever the adults were. I don't even care who the adults were. I'd taken all 3 of them out there and spanked them and then spanked the kid. This is how it's done. So this is the quickest way to destroy a society is to undervalue marriage. We undervalue marriage. We've destroyed the institution of the home, and we've made marriage a joke, and we are paying the price every single day as a society. Number 8, don't steal. Here's a real hard one, verse 15, thou shalt not steal. Stealing is dishonest, it's selfish, and the Bible teaches private property rights. The fact that God says don't take what belongs to somebody else explicitly implies that people own things, and those things that people own are theirs, and nobody else has a right to it but them, because they own it. They worked for it, they own it, it's theirs, you don't have the right to take it. Society can't function in anarchy, and stealing is really just about anarchy. These groups that go into CVS and clean the place out, or they crash into a high-end merchant. Some of these cities, like all of the shops are closing up, and then you have the news people down there with we don't have a grocery store, we don't have a drugstore, everything's closing up. Well, why? Because your bratty children that you raised and their adult teenage loser friends are going in there and robbing the place blind. There ought to be a group in the neighborhood when that's happening. There ought to be a group of adults in the neighborhood. When those kids come out, they each grab one and just pummel them. And grab them up by the back of the hair and take them back in the store and say, put it back. And when the cops show up, they ought to give high fives to all the adults who beat the snot out of these teenagers and young adults that are thieves. Because what do we have now? We have anarchy. Lord help you if you're desperate enough to go into a Walmart after dark. But it's getting to the place where you're just going to place your order online and show up and pick it up because it's cheaper than putting bars on every shelf and having to have associates unchain the shampoo every time somebody needs it. Am I joking or not? No, this is where we're headed. Why? Because we're so intent on being anti-God, and we're so intent as a society of not letting Christianity rule over us anymore, that we literally just like, well, if somebody wants to go in and steal $5,000 worth of handbags from a designer store, well, that's just okay, We'll arrest them, take them to the jail, book them, and then release them with no bail to go out and do it again. Stealing is also the opposite of giving, which is the very nature of God. John 3:16. God is a giver. He's not a taker. He's a giver. And stealing is the opposite. In Ephesians 4, I think it is, it talks about let him that stole steal no more, but rather work with his hands the thing which is good, that he may have to give to him that needeth. If you're a believer in Christ, you ought to be a giver, not a taker. You ought to be, it's more blessed to give than receive. You ought to be looking for ways to give. Number 9, don't lie. Thou shalt not bear false witness against thy neighbor. Jesus is the truth. A lie is the opposite of truth. Don't lie. Don't say things that aren't true, and especially don't say things that aren't true about somebody else. Satan is a liar and the father of lies according to Scripture. Lying in any context is wrong, even when it's meant to spare somebody's feelings. Honesty is always the best policy, but doesn't mean we can't be kind and loving in our honesty. Colossians 4:16, I believe, says, let your speech be always with grace seasoned with salt. Okay, you can be gracious in the truth. Like we've been talking about on Sunday, you can have grace and truth at the same time. You can tell the truth in a loving way. You don't ever have to lie. And that's never the way to go. It doesn't mean that we need to share everything we know with others, by the way. Some things should be kept private. Sometimes people, somebody asks you a question, it's none of their business. It's okay to say that's none of your business. You're not under any obligation in this commandment to tell them the answer to something that's not their business. How much money do you make? It's none of your business. But don't lie. Don't lie because it's none of their. Just tell them it's none of their business. And then really dealing with this idea of perjury or bearing false witness against your neighbor, the idea that you would falsely accuse somebody, that you would say things about them that are not true, that can really damage somebody's reputation, and it's so hard to prove a negative. So you falsely accuse somebody, and then all of a sudden the burden is on them to prove they didn't do it, and that's not fair. And it's just, we just, again, we accept lying all the time in a lot of different areas. In fact, we wouldn't know what to do with ourselves if we didn't have politicians. If a politician actually told you the truth, we wouldn't know what to do with them. You're like, who is this guy? Knows nothing about politics. He's telling us the truth. It's one of the reasons why I would never run for high office. I don't think the voters want to even know the truth, so it would require you to lie to them all the time. I think that's just part and parcel with the game we're running. Imagine somebody running for president telling the truth. The truth is, Social Security is going to be bankrupt in about 6 years. And by the law, they're going to trigger, and you're going to get 20% you're going to get 20 cents on the dollar for your Social Security. Because in 6 years, it's going to not have enough money coming in. A couple reasons for that. One, we've aborted a lot of workers that could have paid into the system. 60 million children have been aborted. That would be a lot of Social Security payers. One, that's two. Two, people are living longer than they used to, so they're taking out far more than they've ever put in. That's the truth. How many votes would that win me? Some of you are in here sitting there. Don't talk about that, Pastor. Don't touch my Social Security. But that's the truth. And we've known that Social Security is going to go bankrupt. We've been kicking the can down the road because nobody will say the truth. Well, we're not going to touch it. Well, we're just going to wait for it to collapse? Mm-hmm. And, of course, we have so much money in reserve that when it does collapse, sure, the government will just print more money and hand it in. That won't trigger more inflation. truth is Medicare is going to be bankrupt in 10. The truth is, if the Chinese stop buying our debt, our economy crashes tomorrow. That's why we can't say no to the Chinese, because we spend way more than we take in. We take in $4 trillion in tax revenue and we spend $7. Try that in your home economics sometime. That's the truth. Have you hear anybody in politics ever say that? No, because they want to keep the money flowing. What we want to hear is, what are you going to give me money for? Forgive my student loans, I feel bad for the people who took out student loans and they can't afford to pay them back. But I feel bad for me because I took out a home mortgage. I don't feel like paying it back. Maybe somebody should pay my mortgage off for me. If you don't know what a loan is, you didn't do well in college. These are just things, and then of course in politics too, you get a lot of smearing of other people. You get that a lot in religion too. I think about 20% of the YouTube channels out there are dedicated to tearing down somebody else. Just be people of the truth. That's what God is. Verse 17 is the last one. Thou shalt not covet thy neighbor's house. Thou shalt not covet thy neighbor's wife, nor his manservant, nor his maidservant, nor his ox, nor his ass, nor anything that is thy neighbor. The word covet, it means to desire or to lust. In this context, we're talking about coveting or desiring something that belongs to something else. It's not that I see Eric got a new car and I say, you know what, I'm going to go get one just like it. And I take my money and I go to the store and I go to the car dealer and I buy the same car. That's not coveting. Coveting is Eric rolls in a new car and I say, I want that car. Why is it? It's not fair that you have that car and I don't have that car. And I think I should have that car. That's what covetousness is. It's wanting what belongs to somebody else. It's not saying, boy, I'm gonna take on some extra shifts and I'm gonna pinch some pennies. I'm gonna go buy myself a car just like that one because I really like that car. No, that's not coveting. Okay. Coveting is what belongs to somebody else. In this context, it's likened to idolatry, really. In Colossians 3:5, I was going to quote it, but my memory isn't what it used to be. Colossians chapter 3 and verse 5 says, Mortify therefore your members which are upon the earth, fornication, uncleanness, inordinate affection, evil concupiscence, and covetousness, which is idolatry. Okay, idolatry is putting more value on something than it deserves, making it the focus of your attention, being something that you in essence worship because you're giving it all your time and affection and attention. And the Bible says covetousness is idolatry. When I lay awake at night wanting Eric's car, instead of being content with what God has given me, that's idolatry. That's how serious covetousness is. And we have to be careful. And he specifically mentions some things in here. Covet thy neighbor's house. What did King Ahab do? He wanted Naboth's vineyard. He coveted Naboth's vineyard. Thou shalt not covet thy neighbor's wife. Be content with your own wife. And if you don't have a wife, you can go marry a wife, guys. But be content. Nor his manservant or his maidservant. Boy, I wish my servants were as good as his servant. You don't hear that very much anymore. Nor his ox, nor his ass, nor anything that is thy neighbor's. And so I don't see a lot of covetousness when I think about all the years that I've pastored and all the churches, that I've been in or ministered in or spent time around believers and things like that. When I talk to other pastors, covetousness is not something that they usually deal with a whole lot. I think as believers, we generally are content with what God has given us, occasionally we get covetous. We actually use the wrong word. We'll say, I'm jealous of Eric's car. That's really not it. I'm covetous I covet Eric's car. I want it for myself. That's not being jealous, is when I desire what belongs to me. Jealousy is actually okay. We use the word jealous improperly. If my girlfriend looks at another guy and I get jealous, that's on me. She hasn't made any. You see a ring on her finger? Was there any I do's at an altar? No, she's my girlfriend. She wants to look at another guy. I might think twice about pursuing the relationship, but she doesn't owe me her affection. She's not my wife. We got married. She starts looking at another guy. Guess what? I get jealous. I have a right to be. She owes me her affection. Okay? But if I say, boy, his wife, she's good looking. I'd like to be with her. Okay, that's covetousness. It's not jealousy, it's covetousness. She doesn't belong to me. And so it's not wrong to desire things. So please understand that the scripture says if we delight ourselves in the Lord, he will give us the desires of our heart. So desiring things in and of itself is not wrong, but our desires need to be centered on the will of God for our life, not the accumulation of possessions based on what somebody else has. There's always going to be somebody who has more things than you. That's okay. My wife and I owned a larger house before we came here. We actually have a house, we lost 500 square feet moving here in a house. We often say, boy, I wish we could have just taken the house with us, packed it up, put it on the truck, and drug it out here, plopped it down somewhere. But we have more than enough house. And I think, I don't want any more house. That's more to vacuum, more to paint, more to clean, more to heat, more to cool, more to do all these things. And Chris and I are just content. We got this little house. We can't get too far away from each other. She'll go in the bedroom, lay down, watch a movie. I'll sit in my chair and watch a baseball game. And that's about as far apart as we can get in that house. And we just love it, and it's great. And we're very thankful for what God has given us. And, well, Pastor, if you had the opportunity to buy a bigger house, would you? No. It just means I'm going to have more room to put junk in, and you know what's going to happen? I'm going to fill my house up with junk. It's going to drive me nuts. I'll be miserable. So have a smaller house. But just being content with what you have. Be content with the spouse you have. Be content with the furnishings you have, the house you have, the vehicles you have. There's nothing wrong with wanting a better vehicle if yours is getting older and things of that nature. There's nothing wrong with that. Pray about it. Work for it. Don't make it an idol. And don't go around looking at what everyone else has and saying, boy, I deserve that. Why do they get that? I should have that. Here, let me lay a guilt trip on you and see if you give me what I want. That's just not it. So we'll stop there for tonight. But could you imagine what our society would be like if we had 10 laws on the books and those 10 laws were these? Be pretty simple. It would cover most of the problems we have. We wouldn't have to have 7,200 pages of laws about fraud and all that. Just simply, did you lie? Okay, you lied, you're out, penalty. We don't need a bunch of laws, we just need to know you lied. Did you take that? Did it belong to you? You're a thief, you're out, let's go. Be so much easier. Did you know Israel in Bible times did not have prisons? You know why? Because they had biblical penalties for everything. Those biblical penalties were swift, they were done, and you went on. They didn't lock you up for years and years and years on end. They might throw you in jail to await trial, but they didn't put you in prison for 10 years or 5 years or whatever. They figured If you're a danger to society, we're going to fix that problem right now, not by locking you up, but by figuring out what we need to do. You're a thief? Well, here's what we're going to do. Some of these are just great. I wish we had them here in America. You know, if you stole, they didn't cut your hand off in Israel. If you stole something, you had to repay 4 times the value of what you stole. If that meant selling everything that you own and leaving you on the street in your underwear, that's what they did. They took everything that you had to pay, and if you didn't own enough to pay that debt back, then they sold you and your wife and your kids into servitude for a period of time, and those people that bought you to serve them as slaves paid your debt for you. And if you ran away from your master while you were supposed to be serving him, they just put you to death. The penalty was death for running away. Now, I think that would be great. I could use cheap labor to mow my yard for me. And there's plenty of people out there stealing that probably should end up in indentured servitude. Oh, we can't do that, Pastor. That's mean. Well, how's the prison thing working for you? Where they go to prison for 5 years and come out a better thief. Most of the people that spend enough time in prison, they enjoy being there. Case in point, the turkey who ripped the front of our shed off. He got out of prison. He had 2 years still left on his sentence. Got out on probation with 2 years left over his head. Stole a truck, stole license plates for the truck, stole a trailer, stole all our stuff. He stole a bunch of stuff from a bunch of other people. Prison doesn't bother him. He's going to spend years and years and years in prison, and it just doesn't bother him. And if they let him out tomorrow, you know what he'd do? He'd find somebody else's shed to rip the front off of and steal all their stuff. He'd go steal a truck and a license plate and a trailer to haul it away in. In Bible times, you know what he'd be doing? He'd be probably in a farmer's field, or he'd be out, filling potholes, or he'd be doing something that he really didn't want to do with the threat of being put to death if he didn't do it until his debt was paid. People tend not to want to go back to that. Some of you are looking at me like I'd done lost my mind. These were God's rules, and you know what? They work. God knows what he's doing in the criminal justice system. Our politicians do not. Bring back the public stocks. That's petty crimes. Put them in stocks. Hang a sign around their head. This is what I did. Let people go by, laugh at them, call them names, poke fun at them. I guarantee you there'd be a lot less petty crime in January in Ohio. Nobody wants to stand outside in the freezing cold all day with their head and their hands sticking through a wooden board. Pastor's mean. No, I just don't like crime. God doesn't like crime. It offends him. It offends me. Should deal with it as if it offends us. Anyway, I can see some of you are just like, no. It's okay. You've been wrong before. All right. I'm having fun with this tonight. I went and visited with Mike and Betty today, and Mike's doing pretty well. Just his issue is having enough strength to get up out of bed and be able to, get himself here. So just pray for him. He just had his 70th birthday last week, I believe. He told me to say hi to everyone. He's praying for the church. He and Betty pray for the church every day and pray for folks here and all of that. So Betty's also having some trouble with her feet. So if you would mind praying for Betty's feet and just for Mike to be able to work on those things. But they both said hello to everybody tonight. Just real quick, the announcements are in the bulletin, but just real quick for tonight, 2 things. We're going to be setting up the owls in the blue room for the bundling tomorrow because there's usually so many people here. They don't fit in the red room. We're going to set that up. Brian's going to set that up. If you're willing to help, we're going to move all the boxes we need in there and get the table set up. I told him how to do it. So if you're willing to help him, just catch him after church. And if you're willing to help me, this is not as important as the John and Romans, but there's a bunch of stuff that needs to come out of the attic, and it needs to either go to the container or go to the back room. It would just be a big blessing to me if we could get a lot of that handed down, so I don't have to go up and down the stairs 30, 40 times. So if we get a couple, 3 guys, and we can just kind of hand it down, kind of like a fire line, pass the bucket kind of a thing, we could probably get it down in about 10 minutes. So would appreciate if anyone's willing to help on that. All right, so that's it for that tonight. Back to our prayer list, I'll mention